Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome journalist Conseil Supérieur de l'Audiovisuel, Christine Kelly.
Bonjour à tous. Je suis désolée. Ravie de vous revoir cet
Hello to all of you. Really glad to be seeing you again. We've started a few minutes earlier than expected, actually, for the afternoon's program. A series of roundtables, including ours about the African media, written press, television, which are obviously in full swing right now in Africa. And you'll recall perhaps that in the 1970s we had a few concerns, or essentially, as far as the written press was concerned, it was mainly belonging to or in the hands of the governments. In fact, in the year 2000, we saw suddenly the press and even the television freeing a little bit those special media. And where are we standing today, basically, regarding the broadcasting, television, and press, written press? So, faulties, weaknesses, challenges, issues, and solutions are what we are going to look at, basically, regarding the situation of the African media. And to that avail, we have a very interesting roundtable of participants on board our panel, with many eminent personalities sitting next to me, starting with Richard Attias, who's the CEO of the New York Forum Institute, as you may know. Youssou N'DOUR, who doesn't need to be introduced anymore, and who's actually managing, apart from his obvious musical hat. In fact, he's the former Minister of Tourism and Culture as an artist in Senegal. And then there's also Dominique, who's heading the Ecofin agency based in Geneva, giving us a lot of information regularly about the state of finances in Africa. And then there's also Mr. Gao, who's the vice editor of China Daily in China. So in the first stage, I think what I would really like to do, because we've got so many things to say about the media, would be to talk about the strength of the African media nowadays, basically. I suddenly became aware, after doing my preparation work and reading a little bit, that things are blooming, basically, in Africa here, because we have more and more African media, and the Africans are producing more and more local programs, which is quite a challenge when you think of it. We've got more than 2,000 different dialects on our continent, about 20 countries speaking on the one hand rather French, the other one's rather English, and all of this is hard to coordinate. But it's also undergoing a sort of boom, because the Africans residing abroad, members of the African diaspora, also want to see some of those African contents broadcast on different media. And as a member of the CSA, I also noticed that Euronews is going to be broadcasting in Africa as well. Africa 24 as well has recently started to broadcast from and on the African continent. And then regularly we see entrepreneurs, CEOs, or from managers or representatives from the chambers of commerce and the industry, basically, to discuss the possibility of base their own African media from the French headquarters, for example, in Paris. So basically there's an obvious thrust of the African media. Can you confirm this, perhaps, Youssou N'DOUR, or is this just a personal impression? Tell me your media and I'll tell you who you are. Thank you very much. I believe we need to distinguish between a couple of things. Let me explain myself. First of all, there's the medium, then there's the media. The medium, or the media rather, which have an impact on the populations. The latter have then indirectly an impact on the social life of a whole nation or a state, locally. And in that respect, Africa is boiling up, basically. Why? Because the frequency, bandwidth are freeing themselves more and more. The existing waves that we already knew, say, on RCM, are fully booked out, basically. And we now have to we'd actually got the year 2015 as our next horizon, whereby the number of channels and communicating or broadcasting motorways and channels will have multiplied even more. So this is the sort of revolution we're currently undergoing. We see a number of TV channels blooming around ourselves, and TV channels are democratizing themselves more and more. You can see an interactive mode of communication whereby all citizens as well as neighboring countries can share their experience and comment on their football experience or topical news and so on. Yeah, let me just bounce on what you're saying about the football dimension. You remember the World Cup in South Africa. What an explosion of media, obviously, in Africa as a whole. That certainly represented a breakthrough, I believe, in the history of the African media. So we know how federating the media or the sports can be for the media and other dimensions, basically. Now, another question I have is concerning the English and French written press. There's a huge discrepancy between the quality of the French and English written media, it has to be said. And in the French francophone, if you prefer, written press, in your paper, L'Observateur, if I am not mistaken, has made a lot of progress in terms of sales results. And you've reached 90,000 copies issues, if I'm not mistaken. Tell me or correct me if I'm wrong. Whereas we couldn't even hope to sell a single daily paper in a day a few years ago. Indeed. To bounce back on the previous question, when I was mentioning football, I was talking about the local dimension. Basically, there's a lot of championship and films being shot at the local scale. But this is yet something different from the international scale that we'll come back to later on. And this being said, regarding our daily newspaper, L'Observateur, which is based in Dakar, we are indeed printing about 90,000 copies a day. And the next paper after us is only printing 25,000. So that will give you an idea of the orders of volumes we're dealing with, and this result probably we've achieved because we tend to give the floor to everyone or as many people as we can, and that gives us a greater credibility. Now, I'd like to turn to another participant of the panel here. You are Mr. Anming at the China, working at the China Daily in China, and we're trying to see or scrutinize a little bit the strengths and forties and weaknesses of the African media. You've taken part in the editorial process of an African weekly. So what is your outlook today on the African press? Is it really undergoing a full expansive boom, as we were suggesting in the beginning? And why did you interest yourself in your Quality of China Daily into the African media? Give us your point of view.
Thank you, Christine. Well, our theme of this forum is how to better tap the potential of human capital in order to facilitate the development, the transformation of the continent. And I think in this regard, the media has a very big role to play. It is important for people, for the laborers, for women and children, and for Generation Y to know more about their regions, about their countries, about their continent, and also about their opportunities and choices. Not really just passively accept some norms or itinerary set or influenced by some powers, but they have to think of their own ways. And in this regard, I would say that Africa still has a long way to go in order to set up and to gradually improve their identity. And for China Daily, for our part, China Daily Africa Edition was founded in 2012, and we think that we may do something together with our African partners to bring more information, more in-depth, more accurate, more balanced information about things which will concern both China and Africa. And in this process, we may facilitate exchanges and help to improve the exchanges between Africa and China.
Alors, ça m'intéresse beaucoup, hein,
So I'm very interested in the reason why you decided to settle here. In fact, we'll come back to it later on, but let me remind everyone that in 2009, China became the first commercial partner of Africa. So we'll come back to it later on, but we'll see the difference perhaps between China Daily in China and Africa Weekly here in greater details. Now, turning to Richard Attias. You're the man by excellence who has a far-reaching outlook on the written press, be it from Morocco or the northern borders of the Mediterranean, all the way down to Africa. So what is your perspective, all the way from New York to here, on the explosion of the media here in Africa, regarding both the written and TV and broadcasting sectors? Well, first of all, I've always said that information is the true power. So starting from that premise, basically, the more access you have to information, the better off you are. So just to give you a very recent example, in spite of a few voices raising themselves against that idea, including mine and that of my spouse, in fact, when those poor women were kidnapped in Nigeria, we had to wait 2 weeks for the media to actually tackle that or raise this issue, and that's the only trigger we found, in fact, to to create some solidarity, basically, or sympathy with this tragical event. So whatever the news or the piece of news, basically, you have to wait until the media cover it in order to for the subject to become a reality globally. And that is bestowing a huge responsibility on their shoulders, obviously. And we were saying a few days ago already how big the gap could be between reality or on-the-field reality and this perception. We can't allow ourselves to fool around or play with this sort of tool. Okay, so you definitely agree that there's a sort of explosion phenomenon? Yes, that's undeniable in terms of numbers of TV channels. Perhaps there are too many of them. There'll be one day we'll reach a saturation station. There'll be too many of them. We'll have to start regulating them or cutting down on the volume. Second thing, the written press. We have more and more, of course, some being professional and less, and others less than the former. And otherwise, of course, the digital media are in constant surge as well, because knowing that everybody and over 1 billion people now have a mobile telephone, it seems to be the obvious and most straightforward way to broadcast and diffuse any kind of information. Okay, so we shouldn't forget about all those strong points or aspects of the African reality. But now I'm turning to Dominique, who's director of the Agence Ecofin in Switzerland, who's broadcasting information for Africa, about Africa, and towards Africa, if I'm not mistaken. So what is perhaps you could bring the microphone a little closer to your mouth, your outlook on the subject. Okay, we communicate on sectoral information, usually concerning finances, energy, the mining sector, telecom, and so on. And we're a rather small unit based in Geneva that is dealing on a daily basis with teams of journalists, which aren't organized as most Pan-African media are by geographical correspondence or sectors, but by specialization, by theme, if you like. So whoever's in charge of mines will probably head for Togo, but could go elsewhere or be based anywhere else. And all of these reporters or journalists therefore specialize in a specific subject matter. In the beginning, few of them were willing or available to go and base themselves in Africa, and now we're gradually developing that sort of regional network, which makes our information all the more precise and accurate in real time. And now, what I would like to add on this subject is that from my point of view, or in my opinion, the African media, everything remains to make still, basically, because the advertising investment on Africa to this day, excepting South Africa, perhaps Morocco, which is fairly mature in that respect. It represents more or less 2/3 of what Belgium invests in terms of advertising. And on those 2/3, people have to feed a television channels, hundreds of papers, thousands of websites, and editing and billboards and whatever. So this is just to give you an idea of what limited means they have and how remarkably performing they are, nevertheless, because they do provide the African consumers and citizens with a quality level of information and rate and price. So there are some dissidents, of course, who poison the life of Mr. Richard Attias, among others, and who claim to criticize the way these media are managed. But I know that there was an intergovernmental meeting in Yaoundé a couple of weeks between 13 countries to try and solve this issue, among others. And in fact, there would be a very easy solution in Europe or in Switzerland anyway. When you want to reference a media on Google, you just have to make sure that you're completely clean, basically, and sufficiently recognized and justifiable, sufficiently interesting content. Whereas in Africa, if you do a blog with 2 references, maybe attesting the existence of your blog, then in 15 days you will be referenced in the Google engine just as high as any official national or governmental body, basically. And that is not a normal situation. I think somebody would have to call upon Google's research specialists and advisors in order to tell them that referencing methods should be changed accordingly. Now, another aspect we'd like perhaps to dwell upon a little bit is the positive little success stories, basically Africa Star, Hollywood, and so on. You're also, I think, integrated in the as much in the Francophone as in the Anglophone part of the African media. And Youssou N'DOUR yesterday, around one of the dinner tables before or after your concert, I heard you talk about the rumors that usually start any kind of news dispersion here in Africa. Can you confirm to us that this is the case? Anybody launching a rumor will actually see it placated in the newspaper or on the editorial page of any national newspaper? Is that really what comes first in Senegal? Well, I'd say that at the beginning of the new social media and internet, as my neighbor just said, basically the communication channels have multiplied by a huge factor, and so even at the level of local, perhaps anecdotal news, it's hard to control and to manage. And I didn't mean this about Senegal in particular, but the whole of Africa, I think, to go back to your confidence or revelation. But we can consider that I think, in my opinion, we're in a growth crisis, in a way. We're positioning ourselves, given that there are a lot of politicians and economic sectors that rely on the media to position themselves strategically. All of this creates a huge chaos in the beginning, obviously, and should be carefully scrutinized. And as Richard said before, of course, yes, there are a lot of media, but only a few probably will stay in the long run. And of course, that'll be measured at the level of their professionalism, proportionately to their professionalism. So I suppose we'll have to concentrate really on the media that carry a vision forward that applies either to subject matters, language, or regions. Yeah, we'll come back to this perhaps later on, but in 2011, for example, I had the opportunity to go to the United States and meet some members of the Obama team, and those members were telling me how even during his electoral campaign, they had to invite sort of individual Lambda citizens who had their blogs and who had improvised themselves as journalists. Is that going to be the norm, you think, the standard? Is that the way forward, to have any Mr. Smith, basically, or Lambda citizen turning up at media and press roundtables? Or how can we balance this out? Richard, yes. Well, we've been talking about the media for at least 10 minutes, but a media can only exist if it has a public. So obviously you have to target certain readers or viewers to become a media as such. And I believe, although it's a personal opinion of mine, that television cannot cheat because it shows images and tells you about what it's showing. So it can only be factual and objective. So in my opinion, television can only be a good and reliable media. Of course, we'll have to concentrate some of them because you can't just switch on your TV and be overwhelmed by more than 70 different channels, because the information will end up killing the information if there's too much of it, basically. And we know also that the media, including TV ones, have to live usually out of advertising income, and the income will obviously spread itself thinly if it has to be shared between 80 different channels rather than a few really good and reliable ones. So, regarding the transformation of the television broadcasting media, I think we should be aiming really at a growing professionalization of the sector and a concentration between the complementary, cultural, sportive, whatever sectors. Now, what I'm more concerned about, in fact, is the way in which the reader or the dilettante bloggers, journalists, bloggers, and the public tend to cope with written or online press. What do you mean? Well, what I mean is that there comes a time when you realize that at least 50% of the information you're dealing with is wrong or truncated, basically. So I'm sorry to be so blunt, but when you're a journalist, you have a duty of responsibility. And when your name is RFI, and you suddenly read that the New York Economic Forum was finished and closed, wrapped up yesterday night. Excuse me, it might sound like a point of details, but it's really an insult to all the members of the panels, all the speakers who actually took the floor today. So you have to be exhaustive in this duty to report on as truthfully and as ethically as possible on what you are reporting on or analyzing. So basically, that's the rule number one. When you want to be a journalist, you want to do it thoroughly and exhaustively. So if you learn about an information, you have to verify it and you have to check it out, basically. That's your duty and your asset with respect to the viewer or the reader especially, who's more vulnerable perhaps than the reader. And to do this thoroughly, and this is really a call to professionalizing the profession, basically, that I'm trying to do. You can't just cut and paste information. Imagine any blog author writing any kind of nonsense on his web page. For example, tomorrow I should try to I could choose to that you decided to come over to the New York Economic Forum against 100,000 wages instead of admitting the truth, which is that you came for benevolently for nothing. And by launching such a rumor, it will end up probably being printed out in the Nouvel Observateur in France and completely discredit you. And this is not to be tolerated. Well, that was a very justified, probably, disclaimer on behalf of Richard Attias. So can I tease you a little bit while you're at it? Of course, I'm always on the move and ready to bounce back, so go ahead. Could you just set the jaw back and try to remain as transparent as possible about these different outgoing or ingoing information? Well, to be honest, when you're here with your team to fight for a continent, and you've been hanging around on this continent or in the place for more than 20 years, which is the case, everybody knows, I hope so at least, that this New York Economic Forum is not a commercial operation. We are not making any money or earnings out of this New York Economic Forum. All of these budgets are spent and spent hopefully wisely, and everybody can see that. So when somebody dares and has the guts to write about the New York Economic Forum without even visiting the place, for A, B, by saying that you're setting up such a forum because you want to develop networking activities with other heads of state, it's just unacceptable. And then when you're, moreover, saying that you're standing in the middle of millions, right, sure, I'm sitting in the middle of 1 million African citizens and brothers and sisters, but not $1 million or euros, and you won't remove this or take this away from me. So when the worst is when French papers that are supposed to be professional, such as the Nouvel Obs or the similar or the likes, try to sell their papers by titling that sort of shameful information. It's them, in fact, who's shaming the profession to make millions. Yes, well, certainly, I think Dominique, among others, wants to react probably to what's just been said. Yeah, I just wanted to say that we work on a daily basis with journalists of all kinds, and their job is obviously to send us little specialized extracts and articles, 3 to 4 of them a day at least. And it's true that if they do their job correctly, they will find some interesting or sensible information. But some of them, in fact, are so passionate about their business that even if they catch malaria, for example, they will continue to send out their articles, and it's harder. It's really hard to be any more professional than some of them are. So I just wanted to say to their credit that not all professional journalists are doing their job in a disappointing way, basically. So these were just a few examples. I fully understand your wrath, Richard, but let's not throw the baby with the bath waters, basically, on that front, because there are a number of journalists, in fact, who will take advantage of the sort of remarks or exchanges we had online right now to regulate even more a profession which should always remain as liberal as possible. Yeah, just a short, brief commentary. I don't want any misunderstanding to arise here. In fact, I'm not throwing the stone to professionals. I'm just saying that they need to remain as ethical and thorough as the most professional of them are. In fact, you at least took 5 minutes of your time to check on the information before believing me, basically, just like you did, and then you double-checked it with other sources, and that's the way any individual should proceed, in fact, but all the more so when you're responsible for spreading a rumor or an information to a whole nation or country, basically. If you have heard or come across a rumor that a company is going to take over a company, you can in 2 minutes ruin all of its business plans, basically. So you need to check your information validated. Same thing for any kind of terrorist attack, which in your terms will have revolutionized the country, and in fact it was just a marginal event. All of this can contribute to the destabilization of the country from a political or an economic point of view. So I'm really honored to be sitting among the members of a panel who are extremely professional and highly reliable, but it's not the case for all the members of the profession. Of course, I agree with what you just said, but of course it's the case, it's applicable to any kind of profession. Yeah, of course, so in a way you both agree and you're not contradicting one another. There are good and bad journalists, those who do their job decently and who will check their sources, which unfortunately can't always save the profession because others are not doing honor to their profession, and this will discredit, of course, the rest of their colleagues or peers. Now, perhaps I'll give the floor to Anming to react perhaps to all of these complaints that Richard and some members of the room, in fact, seem to be sharing about the quality of information in Africa or elsewhere, even in Europe, perhaps.
About factual reporting of news media. Factual reporting is on the top requirements of any professional journalists and news media. But the most difficult part of factual reporting is not really facts instead of rumors are reported, but how news media approach the facts and report on the facts. We know that, media do report on facts, but not all media report comprehensively. They will omit some of the facts. That means that...
Complète ou objective, effectivement.
Okay, well...
Complete and objective, I mean. Complete and objective.
It's important for the news media to approach the facts and give comprehensive account of the facts before they reach any conclusions. I know media have different stands, but before they reach their conclusions, they have to give their audience the basic facts in order for their audience to reach their own judgments. So this is very important.
Vous voyez une différence entre...
Do you see a difference between media in China and media in Africa, or similarities between Europe and Africa, Europe and China, and African China? Do you see differences or similarities?
Similarities and differences among media organizations, in different countries. But we think that it's important for us to learn from each other. For myself, I play host to at least several groups of African journalists every year in China Daily during the last few years. And we discussed a lot of things about how media can do a better work to improve exchanges among China and Africa. And I think this is a great area in which people with ideals can do.
même si en Chine, on ne peut pas tout.
Even if in China press is not fully free, if I may say so, let's be frank.
You have a point, but I wouldn't agree, actually. People have different views of China. Well, China has been developing very, very fast during the last 3 decades. You know, we have altogether 1,900 newspapers in China and more than 2,000 broadcasting stations and TV stations. If the government controls all, there couldn't be any fast development of the new media, And in China, we have 600 million users of WeChat and about the same number of Weibo users. And people can give their views on everything. They criticize the government. They will supervise what the government do. So it takes time, but China is changing fast. And media in China, the media business, the media industry has been developing very fast.
Youssou N'DOUR, vous qui êtes...
Youssou N'DOUR, you went from music to press, to music, to culture. Do you also think there's a lack of moderation and regulation on the media? Well, it depends. What should be done to move forward? It depends on what media you're talking about. I said up front that there were 2 main channels. Firstly, the African countries, depending on what is really done to inform the populations. And during those last years, I mean, before there were state television, state newspapers. Today, this has improved a lot, thus allowing population locally to be well informed. It was said that, in 2006, there were more than 5,000 newspapers, TV channels, and so on. Yes, you're right. As my friend Richard says, it's growing so quickly, so that of course it is like a teenager crisis. Now, how can you regulate that? You have to be conscious that the media is not a toy. Being a journalist, that's an extraordinary job. I love journalists. You have to protect this job. It has to be more professionalized. We have ideas in this area, but beyond the local aspect, we also need to talk about these media in certain regions, countries, and continents which have their policies which put so many information on Africa. So if you want to speak and you're against some ideas, you have to go to France and Europe, and you then throw away information. So you need to answer to meet these problems. So Africa needs to have its own medium to be able to give its idea and influence to the rest of the world. Otherwise, that's a big problem. I will ask you to conclude in one sentence later. First of all, 1 or 2 questions in the audience. I would like first to have questions. First questions over there. Now go ahead. Hello, everyone. I'd like to know what you think about the lack of trust and confidence about local media. More and more African consumers prefer to turn to foreign medias like Canal Plus and others, therefore neglecting local African media, and hence having also social networks moving up. because it seems that the information is given freely through these channels. Okay, I'll regroup the questions to move quickly.
My name is Mark Jordan. I'm a blogger from Ghana and a media entrepreneur. My first take on the whole African media transformation is the fact that African journalists are lazy. We have to just come to that level. Most African journalists are lazy. They will not put in the hard work. All they want to do is just do shady work, produce on TV, and that's it. The second point I want to also draw is the fact that most of them lack technical training. It's about time there should be some sort of fellowship between journalism schools in the US, in Europe, with counter-journalism schools in Africa, so that they're able to be trained proper and they're able to use the tools that are being used by bloggers and today's social media users. My third point is on private-owned media houses in Africa. Most private-owned media houses in Africa are not helping the situation because they are using the media as a propaganda tool to help probably the current government or against the current government. So we have a case where a private practitioner is owning a media house just used for propaganda. Most journalists, most people working in those houses are not going to do any good work.
Do you have a question?
My question is, how can we better change this whole dynamism? Thank you.
Très bien. On prend une dernière question là-bas, madame. Ici.
Last question over there. She's raised her hand for a long time. Nadia Salah, responsible for the largest independent private group in Morocco. We're investing in other countries in Africa. Just a short story, and I'll come to my question. So my mother lives in France. She's been told stupid things about what's going on in Morocco. And then I come to see my mother, and her friends tell her, "Oh, my poor child, how can you do over there with your burqa?" That's what my mother believes about my job in Morocco. I mean, this was a comment about bad information. A last question, and please, a question. Madam? No more question? Thank you. Clémentine Cassie from Ivory Coast, farmer. Thank you very much for this debate. Congratulations to the journalists telling the truth, going in dangerous places and sending us news from there. But I'd like to have the human factor be more important, because you have false or true information that threaten families. Couldn't you have a World Day saying that journalists we do our jobs, but some truths are not good to be said? For instance, saying that at one frontier, a country attacked another one, the population is uprising against population from the other side. This destroys many things. Therefore, couldn't there be something over there to control the use of information? As you can see, bad information is very bad. We do see in a lot of media, even in France or outside of France, that media are used to use the tools to raise up racism. You just need one word, one bad information to have an uprising of a whole people. Remember the Tutsi genocide. Some radios encourage this genocide. Never forget that. Youssou N'DOUR, would you like to answer 3 questions? Loss of confidence in local medias, yes or no, why? Why? How better improve and this bad information, disinformation, as was just mentioned. Well, thank you very much. we need answers there, and we need to bring the answers here. It's good to debate. Answers are needed there for professionalism. I'm happy to announce here an initiative, an African initiative for the African media, and I will ask Africans, the ones that are interested in Africa, to come through with us through this fund to increase the possibilities of training, of management, and of vision regarding our sectors or our regions, areas, to incarnate not only locally but internationally, give our vision, the vision of the African continent. I want to be ask very solemnly here to ask the investors, the one interested in Africa, to join us to build this fund, working in a very transparent and professional way, working in the exclusive interest of Africa and its media, because this is a very sensitive subject. This is my way of answering the question. So you are announcing at the New York Forum Africa the creation of the first ever Pan-African Fund to help local media at Pan-African level to professionalize the journalist sector. Let us not forget that there are efforts that have already been done. Africa 24 and etc. We're not there to ruin all this. We need to build on that, and this fund is to support the media, to help them professionalize. I'm not saying through that current media are not professional. We want to move to the next dimension. I insist, because this is the way forward to gain and reach the next development, so much awaited by the young generation who are still criticizing. You need to regularize and regulate this situation. So again, I invite everybody to join us through this transparent fund. I will let Richard Attias conclude, but I like pragmatic answers. When will this be created? How much will be will be funded? And then Richard Attias will talk about it. It's a joint initiative with Youssou N'DOUR. Since we've been talking about that, we said something was to be done. It's not only about talking, so it is something we're putting in place with operational teams, day-to-day work. These teams already exist, teams from my side and from Youssou N'DOUR teams. We're talking here about $500 million funding with before the end of 2014. We've started discussions with large international investors, and I totally agree with Youssou N'DOUR say, if Africa wants to take its fate in its hands, we cannot wait for international funding. There are in Africa billionaires, money, so we need this money from the African people. Third thing, as Youssou said, and it answers a lot of questions. There's a need for professionalism. There's a need for training. So our journalist schools, it is important to invest in those. It is important to invest in content production schools, be it in sports, entertainment, news, art, and culture. And this is very important to support the creation of new companies or the development of existing companies to produce content for Africa and to help starting businesses to move forward. And we're finalizing an investment committee both with African professionals and international professionals. Do you have a name for this fund? It's the African Media and Entertainment Fund. Well, that's great. Thank you very much for this announcement. Quite a surprise to try to answer the difficulties that have been raised. Thank you very much for participating to this debate. We'll meet in a few moments. Thank you.